Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world of ours. And I have been counting down the days to this interview because the gentleman that is sitting next to me is someone I really, really look up to in terms of the work that he's doing and the path he has walked to get there. So I came across Phil's work, I believe, on LinkedIn, and I read about a couple of things that you are doing and that you're offering. And it touched my heart just in the right space. And I knew I had to reach out to you and ask you if you would do us the honor to come and speak with me to our audience. And here you are. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Phil Cohen. Can you please do us the honor to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah. First, let me thank you. I mean, for having this space for people
Mm,
because, yeah, anytime somebody's talking about grief and anything around it, that's a good thing just because so many people
yeah,
avoid the subject, obviously.
I agree.
So yeah, my name is Phil. Online, people know me as the grief guy. In 2015, my 14-year-old son Perry and his close friend were last seen leaving the Jupiter Inlet, which is out of South Florida. They were on a 19-foot fishing boat, and there was this really bad storm that came out of nowhere. If you live anywhere near South Florida or maybe some coast, it's like this, but South Florida, there's these storms that just pop up and don't be there for a few minutes and be gone. And this one was a bad one. 40-mile-an-hour winds, heavy rains. Coast Guard was notified. They searched for 7 agonizing days. In the end, neither of the boys were ever found, and even to this day, we're not 100% sure exactly what happened.
Mm,
So, needless to say, and I'd never really lost anybody before that. My grandparents, but I wasn't very close to them. So this was a brutal
yeah.
introduction to grief and everything that happens. And so that just led me on a, a path, to doing what I'm doing now. But I'm not sure, yeah, how much of my story you want to know.
I would like to ask you a question about something that I can only imagine would be on a lot of people's mind when we hear a story like that.
Yeah.
I first of all want to say my heart goes out to you because this is just something that obviously came so unexpected to you. And as you said, you had no experience with grief whatsoever beforehand. For me, as a parent myself, I think what is lingering the most is this unknown. How do you
Yeah.
deal with this unknown for such a long time? And you said it's never been resolved, you know? I feel for me, I'm getting goosebumps when I just say that there's this lack of closure that you deal with. How did you deal with that, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. So yeah, there really never is a closure, and there's layers to this whole thing, right?
Mm,
So just, I mean, losing a child is torture enough, right?
yeah.
Some parents have to see certain things, right?
Mm,
And sometimes there's things you don't know. And when you don't know, it causes different issues because your brain needs a story, right? It needs a
yeah.
story. So,
Yeah.
not having the full picture, I had to do everything I could to try and fill in any of those blanks.
Hmm.
So that meant, during the time was talking to the Coast Guard, any of the agencies that were involved, and then even like looking at every social media report because there was so
Hmm.
heavily
Of
covered,
course.
every
Yeah.
post, every news article, everything, trying to find the information to try and put together. But, then while so many people, I'm sure, who watch this or who are experiencing grief go through a point when they continually ask why, right? Or why
Hmm.
and what happened. And while these questions are important to ask, especially in those early days, because there
Yeah.
very well may be some important information, but
Yeah.
sometimes you don't get all the information. So sometimes, when you ask about closure, if there's anything, if there is such a thing, it would really come from being willing to maybe stop asking the questions that aren't able to be answered.
Hmm. Wow. And that takes a lot, right? Because as you said, it's just unimaginable to experience that as a parent, and then having to stop asking those questions that are so burning in your heart. to be able to start something of a healing journey. I don't know even how to put that. In these early stages. You don't even think of healing. You just think of surviving and getting, through one day at a time. May I
Absolutely.
also ask, was Perry your only son?
Yes.
I know we said we are able to tackle the hard questions today, and I know, Phil, you're just the right person to ask these questions. I'm thinking of one particular friend I mentioned to you before we went online, who's watching this right now, who lost her only son. And the questions that she asked me when I started working with her in 2019 was, I was wondering, am I even still a mom? And my instant reaction was like, absolutely, you are. You gave birth to this child, you raised him, you'll always be
Yeah.
a mom.
Yeah.
And to me, this distinction of who dies first does not make a difference to is she a mom or not, or are you a dad or not. Have you dealt with this question at all? Did you go through this process? How was that for you?
Very much so. Absolutely. I mean, I think, any loss, the more I work, the more I do this, the more people I speak to, the more I realize that, grieving is very much in an identity crash
Mm,
and identity
mm, yeah,
reconstruction, especially for
yeah,
parents and even, spouses of long-term marriages. Who
yeah.
am I without this person or without them
Mm,
here? So absolutely, yeah. I mean, in my TED talk, I actually said that. Yeah, does this
mm,
mean I'm not a father anymore? Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Something I struggle
yeah.
with, just, yeah, identity is a real big part of
Mm,
grief. So yes, but yes, I am his father. He'll always be my son. And yeah,
of
I never
course.
second guess that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I
Yes.
also think, when we think of that, I couldn't agree more. You put that so nicely, or I don't want to use the word nicely in this case, but perfectly into this phrase of identity crush. And I often work with this question, who am I after loss?
Yeah.
And for me, there is this beauty in the work that both you and I do, of that you can address this question from two completely different perspectives. You can address it from this absolute soul destroying, devastating perspective, or from a really empowering perspective, because there is so much opportunity in how do I want to rebuild myself? Who do I want to be after this? What do I want to take forward in that? And I often talk about the power in grief, because there is so much primal power in losing someone that is usually only seen as devastation, as soul destroying, as ripping you apart. But I also found a moment in my own journey where I could feel that I could tap into the power to rebuild myself. And I would love to hear your perspective, how how you dealt with this primal power that we all feel um, in our grief journey at some
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably and many people that I'm not sure who are watching this, who certainly would never understand or don't want any power from this, right? Like it's like,
Mm,
anything that you gained from this, I would give it all back in a heartbeat to have
yeah,
Perry here, right?
yeah.
But you're right. If you are, if you walk this journey and you're willing to face things, because many people avoid this, right? Or many people just get stuck. But yes, if you're there are certain things, that gifts, if you call it, that have come from, this whole situation. And even just being on this podcast and speaking to amazing people all over the
Mm,
world is one of them. But yeah, for sure. I mean, that fear of nothing, right? Like the worst thing on the planet has already happened.
mhm.
So, like, what else could possibly happen that could be worse than that? Right. So, if
Yeah,
you've gone through like the worst possible thing in your life and, survive, then yeah, there's like, it's definitely made me fearless in a certain way, but also extremely compassionate, like to the fact that you never know who you're talking to and what they're doing and what they're dealing with
yeah,
in any given moment.
yeah.
Because, there were times where you have to push through there, whether it be work or certain times where you got to keep composure and nobody would have any clue that I was carrying, what I was carrying in those moments. So,
Yeah.
just knowing that as well. But yeah, there are certain, I believe that's the question you were asking. Am I answering
Mhm.
the right question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when you just said that, it triggered something else for me that I want to bring in here. The word resilience. It is
Mhm.
thrown around quite regularly and frequently and quite loosely in the space of grief. You hear it all the time, and I'm sure that
Yeah.
you would have
I
been hit with it
got it
as well.
tattooed right there on my
Oh
wrist.
my God. Oh my God, then I'm asking the right person. I didn't even
Yeah.
realize that. I love that. So I wrote about it yesterday, actually, in my newsletter, and I made an observation that in many times when people are labeled with the word resilience, you're so resilient, you're so strong, you got through this. And I also understand that the journey that you and I have walked with very, very different circumstances, um, that resilience becomes an anchor somewhat. And I have also observed in my journey that a lot of people that are labeled with resilience are truly deeply lonely underneath that label and have learned to mask it so well. And then
Mhm.
people sometimes mistakenly call that mask resilience. I'm absolutely certain you know exactly what I mean by this
Totally.
fine nuance.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, times where we all wear masks, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
I think it just even, as a man, I'm 55 and I was pretty much
Mm,
raised to believe that, real men don't cry,
mm,
we don't share emotions, we don't seek therapy. Real men,
mm.
we suck it up and we tough it out,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
but that it just doesn't work when you lose your child or you lose somebody so precious to you.
Yeah.
There is no toughing it out or just sucking it
No.
up, right?
No.
So yeah, but there was definitely times where you try to act resilient and wear that mask. But I guess the fact is, it's like resilience. I guess you define as the ability, what, to bounce back, right? Ultimately, is, I guess,
Mhm.
the basic definition,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, because you talked about becoming a different person, and in one of my, I don't know, more popular videos that I have, I don't know if you saw it, it's of a Jenga, where this basically a Jenga set that I use where I just remove certain pieces
It
that
was quite a
represent
large
parts of
one,
your,
right?
yeah, it's a bit
But
larger
yeah,
one,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think
So
I've seen it.
yeah. And also, a lot of people have a tendency to isolate too. So,
Mm,
and to just shut themselves in, which, if anybody who's grieving and watching this, that's completely normal, right? So many people, grief has a tendency to make us the smallest version of ourselves.
mm,
We just
yeah.
kind of just contract down to
Mm,
really, and it's that you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that's a survival mechanism for many of
yeah.
us. And,
Absolutely for
you know,
self-protection.
yeah, yeah, and people
Mm,
don't know what to say. You don't want to put yourself in those situations, so you just isolate. You know, but doing that for too long is also can be also pretty dangerous in circumstances as well. So,
yeah.
yeah, so yes, but I guess when it comes to resilience, ultimately, um, wearing a mask doesn't make it resilient. I think make a person resilient. I mean, yes, you have
Mm,
to in certain cases, but um, sometimes, and I learned this early on, quite honestly, that sometimes taking off the mask, and letting certain people know like how you're
mm.
feeling can really open the door to some special relationships and certain healing that you might not experience otherwise.
Oh my God, I love this. This
Yeah.
is so beautiful. I really, if all of you watching this take anything away from this podcast, it's exactly what you just said. Sometimes removing that mask, it might lead to healing that is absolutely unexpected. It's just really beautiful because in this raw vulnerability, this is really where the true healing can come in. I absolutely believe that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Phil, you've walked quite a path. Like, how many years has it been since
Yeah, a little
that
over 10.
tragic day? A little over 10 now. Can you give us a bit of a sort of bullet point timeline what happened thereafter? Because what you have created out of this adversity is just beautifully mind blowing, and really, like, I would like for you to guide us all the way to your inner garden. Can you just give us a bit
Sure.
of a timeline what happened?
Yeah.
Because it's just, yeah, I love what you've done with this journey. Hence you're here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So, um, yeah, this all started with a friend and I talking about the 5 stages of grief and what BS they are, and I can't believe that there are still people like
Yeah.
therapists still handing out the 5 stages of grief. And
Yes.
and he's like, man, you should do a TED talk on this, right? And
Mm.
so, how like when you say things, your phone hears you, whatever, something popped up about a TED talk. I applied. I gave this TEDx about 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years
Mhm.
ago. And it did pretty
I
well. It's
love
kind of,
that you talked about this in the TEDx talk, the 5 stages of grief, because I explain
yeah,
it in every second podcast how wrong it
yeah,
is applied. Yeah.
yes. And just the fact that there are still people being told that there are stages that you should go
Yeah.
through and things like that. But yeah. So yeah, that whole thing left me completely confused.
Yeah.
So I gave this TEDx, and it's been viewed quite a few times. And after that, the weirdest thing happened. So people start like from all over the world just
Mm.
started contacting me. They were, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? And at first I was like, why? Like I didn't know why. Like I didn't understand why. Like, I don't have a
Wow.
degree. I mean, even I am clearly saying like what I offer is not therapy. I
Mm.
don't have a master's degree. I have a PhD in experience, right? Like that's what I have.
Yeah.
That's the degree that I have.
Hmm.
And I just started talking to all these people, and I started to get obsessed with understanding like how is it possible that some people can go through the most unspeakable tragedies. Like, you know, the one thing I hear all the time, the one phrase I hear all the time is, Phil, I can't imagine. I can't imagine, right?
Mm.
And people can't, and I don't want them to, right?
Yeah.
But um, there are stories that I could share with you that we would just literally both start crying, like just like
Mm.
stuff that was like, I don't know if I could have survived that, right?
Mm.
Um, and not only are some people doing well, but they're thriving. Right. So
Mm.
how is it possible that some people can go through these things and thrive while other people just get stuck for a long period of time, right? So,
Hmm.
and there's these 4 things that continually kept on showing up time after time. So I started working with people one on one. And when you work with people one on one, as you really just listen, right? Like I'm a
Mm.
container. Like I
Yeah.
don't do a lot of the talking at all. I ask good
It just holds
questions.
space.
I hold space, right? But at the
Mm.
end, oftentimes I'm like, there's so much I want to share with them. Like, there's so much I want them to know about, like, exactly what's happening inside them and why they're doing these things and all of that. So that's where this inner garden came from. It was like, here's
Mhm.
my chance to, here's everything I want you to know, right? And then we can talk about it. So I started holding these workshops, and they're, based on the metaphor of a garden, obviously. So like week one, we talk about soil, which is the foundation of any garden, right? So soil is all about everything that's happening in your brain, in your body, in
Mhm.
your spirit, in your identity. Because if you know what's happening, it's helpful to understand why you're acting the way you are and that you're
Mhm.
not alone, and
Mhm.
gives you opportunity to be able to take the next step, right?
Mhm.
Week two, we talk about emotions, which are the creatures that visit your garden, right? Some of them are beautiful, like a butterfly, some sting like a bee. So, I did it this way because one, I want to make it memorable. Two, I want it to feel a hell of a lot less clinical.
Mhm.
So we do that. So we meet every week for 8 weeks, and then I meet one-on-one with each person, and we walk through how they can apply it. And yeah, and been seeing some really good results with it. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
And it's so beautiful, and it's also so relatable. When we give people something to compare it to, it starts making sense in their brain. And I think when we go through these adversities at first, there is a lot of numbness. You know, for me, I remember the biggest feeling. People always said to me, "Do you mind sharing how you felt when you got that phone call?" You know, and the one word that sums it up is surreal. It was
Yeah.
just so surreal. I felt like there's a saying in German, and it translates so nicely into English because it instantly makes sense. I felt like I was in the wrong movie. Like it was
Mm,
just absolutely surreal. I thought this can't be right. You know, I knew the entire day that something had happened, but I did not expect that. Absolutely not. So when I received a phone call confirming that Rob had in fact died on the other side of Australia, I fell into this space of surreal. My whole world was spinning. And I think when we go through this surreal moment, this numbness, this absolutely, your mind is literally just protecting you, you know,
oh,
to
for
not
sure.
completely fall
Yeah.
apart. And yet, for a lot of us, exactly that happens either instantly or sometimes there's a delayed reaction where you have this. For me, it took 3 weeks till I had my complete
Oh,
falling
yeah.
apart moment because I was just in surreal mode, in survival mode, in I need to hold space for the boys because their dad just died. And then 3 weeks later, when everything was ticked off the list that had to be done, flying across, identifying his body, arranging the funeral, and then in the same week of the funeral, taking my younger son to the first Holy Communion,
Yeah.
that night I fell apart,
Hmm.
completely fell apart. And I think when then somebody with such a beautiful soul like you comes in with this analogy of the inner garden and starts making sense to your brain, to your senses, to your experiences, and when you, it's like you just said, I'm going to use the same analogy. I love this. When you prepare the soil for them, you know, and you prepare it so you can plant those seeds, then things start falling into place. The seeds start falling into that soil and they can grow. And then that's where healing can start. And I
Yeah.
find that so beautiful that you have created not just a container, but this beautiful garden where people can come in and work with those analogies and have somebody who's gone through it. I had
Yeah.
a very, very deep conversation last night with my younger son, how important it was for me to find a therapist um, for them and myself who had lived experience with grief. And he
Yes.
asked me why that is so important. And I said, because I don't think that anybody, and that's without any disrespect to any therapist out there, who learns about grief will ever understand to the depth of somebody who's actually walked through it themselves
Yeah.
how to hold space for someone. And I understand this is very tricky to say that here out in the public, but I stand by that. I honestly don't think that anybody who's not experienced, and I don't think that's true for every single case. You don't have to experience everything to help people through. But in the space of grief, I truly believe that. I truly feel that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had a lot of people come to me that said, in this one retreat that I came for, and this one course that I did with you, I got so much more out of the 10 years working with my therapist. And I always ask them the question, has your therapist experienced grief themselves? And then they was like,
Hmm.
oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I truly believe that that is the one decision maker that makes all the difference.
Yeah. And
Um,
sometimes
yeah.
people, even for them, it's that if people believe that they're talking to somebody that they believe even understands even a little, that's
Mhm.
just super helpful. Like there's this
Yeah.
whole paradox, especially I think with child loss, is that literally you
Mhm.
wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy, right?
Mhm.
Because it's that bad. And I'm not saying that one loss is worse than another at all.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, at all, but it's one of these things, it's like where it's like I wouldn't want anybody to ever know this pain, but at the same time, I really want to talk to somebody who understands.
Yeah.
Because everybody you
Yeah.
talk to, you're like, yeah, yeah, no matter what they say, it's like, thank you, but it's like in the back of your
Mm.
mind, you're like, yeah, but you don't really understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's often that you do get that, I talked about that last night in this beautiful conversation. Is that, I have had a few friends of mine, very close friends, that had this conversation with me, and I said none of them dared to say it directly to me,
Yeah.
but a lot of them have tiptoed around the idea of, did I chase happiness too soon? And it's such an interesting fact because this is what Rob and I had promised each other in a what if conversation 3 years prior to his passing, where we had no idea that it would happen. We had no idea. But I truly believe in divine guidance. We're looking back now, hindsight is always 2020 vision. I can see all the little and big steps that had prepared me for this. And in our conversation, we promised each other to create the happiest life possible for me and the boys, or whoever was the remaining parent and the boys. And that became my lighthouse in my
Yeah.
in my darkest hour.
Yeah.
And I knew that that was my only path to survive through this, to
Oh
get
yeah.
through this, by chasing happiness. And it never meant that I didn't grieve, but
Oh,
what the outside
absolutely.
world saw was something so different. And a
Yeah.
lot of people held this opinion that, oh, maybe she was hiding away from grief, or maybe she was avoiding it. I wasn't. I just
Yeah.
walked a path that made it survivable for me in a most beautiful way. And it's bizarre to
Yes.
be able to say that in this, but hearing, I actually do want to share this, although it's highly personal. Hearing um, from my very own, not only, I've got two, from my very own son last night, that I've done the right thing. I looked at him and said, I cannot tell you how much that means to me that you
Mm.
just said that to me. I just
Wow.
hugged him, and I just thought, it's been 8 years almost for us now. And for him to say that, because now he's at an age where he can work through these things and articulate it very, very differently. And I value that so much. And I'm
Yeah.
very aware of sharing that with you, where you have lost your son, but we are on such different losses. And as you said, we're not here to compare the losses, but it's the message that I want to bring across. And why I'll share this here is that people from the outside often have opinions about how it should be or how it shouldn't be, how we should grieve, how we should not grieve. And when you do something that is so out of the ordinary and you create something so beautiful out of such tragedy, like you did, like I did, and people say to me, I just don't understand. My favorite answer to them is always like, I'm so glad you don't.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in any mean way. I mean that in the most beautiful way, because it just means that they haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
I would like to go back to your inner garden because I just love it so much.
Sure.
When people are listening to this right now, to our beautiful conversation here, and they're intrigued to find out a little bit more, can you share a little bit what would be the, hey, this is right for you, if sort of little bullet point form, when people are listening and think, is that something that I'm ready for? Is there a ready for? Can you share a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, for sure. And I do like I don't have a button on my website that's like here, click and pay and join,
Yeah,
and I speak with people one on one to make sure that it is a right fit
love
for
it.
that reason, right?
I do the
And
same. I so
yeah,
prefer it.
yeah, for
Mm,
sure. I mean, one of the biggest things is I look for is, how soon is it, right? Like if it's right away,
yeah.
generally probably not the best fit for inner garden if it's like within the first
Mhm.
like few weeks,
Yeah.
just because, yeah, because I'm going to ask you to do some work that just you won't be ready for in those moments. So it's for somebody that's obviously lost somebody that they love, where they feel stuck, where they don't know who they are, where they're like kind of
Mhm.
lost their sense of self or purpose, or not sure where to go next. They've read the books, they've tried therapy, they tried the groups, none of those things seem to work.
Yeah.
And also if they're experiencing, high levels of guilt, even though in the back of your mind it's not your fault, but it still really feels like it. Um, and you really want to be able to carry them forward with you with grace and strength, then Inner Garden is a good fit.
I love it, especially when you just mentioned guilt. Can you speak on that a bit?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Mm,
there's one thing that doesn't even matter, like parent, spouse, child, that I say it's not even 99% of the time. It's 100% of the time. And that people feel some level of guilt. And even though that
mhm,
they know it's not their fault, they still feel guilty. And you literally see this play out in our workshop, in my workshop, because yeah, everybody introduces themselves and you get to know everybody. I only take 15 people. I keep it very private and intimate for a reason. Um,
beautiful.
so you literally hear people say things, tell their story, and in your mind you will think, well, it really sounds like you did everything you possibly could. You're an amazing spouse, you're an amazing parent. Like
Mm,
none of this seems like it was your fault at all. It seems like you did everything you could have. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
yeah.
Like people still blame themselves in some
Mhm.
way, and they do that for a reason. But yes, it's just like, yeah, the guilt is one of the big things that keeps really good people stuck.
The one thing I have not even asked you in our pre-chat or behind camera, and I'm just going to do it now if that's okay,
Sure.
is about your spiritual beliefs.
Mhm.
Did or did they not help you in this path? I'd love to hear a little bit about that if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they helped me a lot in my this
Mm,
path. I wouldn't have survived without them.
mm,
Yes, I'm a Christian man. So
mhm,
that is my spiritual belief.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so without having the knowledge, so just to make a very short version of this story, as short as possible, you started going to church, started telling my friends about God and Jesus, and people would say, "Well, that's great, Phil. You really believe people live to be 800 years old. You really believe someone lived in the belly of a whale for 3 days? Like, you believe that?" And I hated that I couldn't talk that with any type of
yeah.
intellectualism, whatever word I'm looking for there. Um, um, yeah, that it was just more of like my spirit, and I felt it. So that got me studying something called apologetics, which
Mhm,
I'm not sure if you know what apologetics is, but it basically convinced me that the Bible is the word of God, that there is a God, and how to be able to not prove that, but defend
mhm,
that at a high
mhm,
level, right? So prior to
yeah.
losing Perry, I'd already convinced myself that there is a God and that
Mhm,
the Bible is his word. So then you're really faced with a question is, okay, well, now what?
mm,
Right? Now what? Like what kind of God, God, you could have chosen any way to tell the world how much you love the world and, a word picture, a parable. But as God, you chose to say that I love the world so much that I gave my only son, yet you took mine.
mm,
How do I make sense of that?
yeah.
Right? So, it was probably on the sixth day of the search, because we had Perry's boat went missing on a Friday. They found the capsized boat on a Sunday, and
Mhm,
there was neither of the boys were in the boat, which meant they were in the water if they were still
yeah.
alive. You can only survive a certain amount of time in the water.
Mhm,
So on day six, I realized that I was pretty certain I was never going to see my son again. And yeah, I don't know how many times I've actually mentioned this either, but I'll go ahead and mention it. So I went into a room and I prayed, and I was praying, and at one point I said, "Okay, God, thank you." Like I don't know why I'm saying thank you, but I know that your word says to say thankful in all things, and that somehow you will make something that I just don't understand understandable, or give me something from it, right? So
yeah.
yeah, so that's the short version.
Yeah. Wow.
um, yeah,
I can't believe we asked this question at the very end of the interview because this is a beautiful segue of not just saying thank you, Phil, for being here and for sharing so openly, but also um, I like that we leave it at a bit of a cliffhanger here because I do want to have you back for a part two.
sure,
We already talked about that before we even started, because there's
sure.
something beautiful coming that we are not yet to announce. And once that is ready to announce, we will have you back and maybe continue a little bit more about that
Yeah,
story that that we just started about spirituality, because I feel it plays such a huge role in how we handle a loss like that or a transitioning like that, depending on what words you prefer here. And I really am looking forward to continuing that conversation with you. So before we finally go here, is there anything that you would like to share where, like, if you just take one thing away from this interview, or how people can reach out to you? We will share all the links in the show notes, so don't worry too much about that. But
Yeah.
wrap us up here, Phil.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for having me. And yeah, if
Mm,
there's one last thing that I would share, it would just be, just you're not broken, you're not crazy, just keep going, even if it's moment to moment. Um,
mm,
just like a seed, right? You plant a seed and you don't see
yeah.
anything, but things are happening. Just keep doing the right things.
Thank you so much for being here. Anyone who's interested in maybe joining that beautiful inner garden of Phil's, we will be sharing the links in the show notes, how you can connect with Phil, how you can learn more about it. And Phil, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate your authenticity, your vulnerability here, especially as a guy, as you said, it's the grief guy. And this is Phil.